What's going on, everybody? Zack Rosenblatt here, No Huddle Show. We're live at Nissan Stadium in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm here with Mike Kaye. That's your name, right?
You can hear me breathing, right?
Yeah. Famously a loud breather. We're here after the Eagles lost to the Titans 26-23 in overtime. It was an intense game. All their games have come down to the wire, but this one was the first one where you kind of felt like they were in trouble when it came down to it, right?
Yeah, sure. I think it's hard to trust both the offense and the defense. When you look at these four games overall, even when in the games that they've won, you never felt like they were going to lose those games. In the games they lost, you're like, what team showed up? And so they're undefeated at home, defeated on the road, and so yeah, this just had the feeling of kind of, once they went to overtime, I still wasn't convinced that they were going to win this game.
You know, we'll cover this because we have a lot to talk about. Doug Pederson, it was an interesting game for him. He kind of prides himself on playing to win and not playing not to lose.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And it felt like today the play calling and the decision making kind of was like more towards trying not to lose. They were playing it safe a lot of the time. They did take a lot of shots downfield. Carson Wentz looked really good. The protection wasn't great. There was a lot of mistakes made. There was a lot of drops. Like that's all considered. But there were certain play calls that happened throughout this game that where you're like, this doesn't feel like the same team. I mean, we should have known this is a different team last year. That's just the reality of it. And I think if there was ever a moment where we realized that this is just going to be a different season, it was tonight or today or Sunday.
Sunday, yeah. This was a game that I think everybody came in very confident. And, the Titans are a weird team. They win ugly. That's the only way they win. And that's kind of been the Eagles' forte this season in their 2 wins. And I think the Titans kind of just beat them at their own game. I mean, they used their big-bodied wide receivers and tight ends really, really well. They were able to move the ball late and own the game late, which is something Carson Wentz has done for the majority of his career.
I mean, they had that towards the end of the game. I think they had like a 19-play drive, which is reminiscent of what the Eagles had against the Colts last week to win the game.
Right, and I think for the Eagles, they were outplayed in their own style of play, if that makes sense. You've got a mobile quarterback. You've got a guy who spreads the ball around. You have a defense that's able to get to the quarterback and will take risks in the secondary. And, the thing is, I think one of the biggest plays in this game, and we'll probably get into it more later, is Lane Johnson, who in my opinion is the best right tackle in football, getting beat pretty easily by Harold Landry.
A rookie.
No. Harold Landry. Oh.
Yeah, on the strip sack, it was Harold Landry.
Oh, right, yeah, Harold Landry. Sorry, I was getting him confused with Eli Harold for something in my brain. Yeah, so Harold Landry beat him with a speed rush, just got around the edge. Carson didn't even fully do his drop back before he got hit. And I think, they were within Eagles territory. The play happened on 3rd and 20 from the Eagles 40-yard line. And, the defense held the Titans to a field goal on the next possession, but that's where the momentum started to kind of wear. And I think you look at the Eagles had the momentum of this game in the third quarter. They built a 14-point lead in the third quarter, but they settled for field goals in in the red zone in 3 of those trips, and that's basically what it came down to. They allowed the Titans to come back in this game because they settled for field goals as opposed to scoring touchdowns.
The interesting thing was it was like the tables seriously turned because in overtime, the Titans lined up on 4th down to kick a 50-yard field goal. I believe the Eagles called timeout, and then Mike Vrabel or whoever, I'm not even sure who their offensive coordinator is, but they made a decision. Actually, you know what? Let's go for a first down, and they pretty easily got on a screen to Deion Lewis. It was like a 15-yard gain. A couple plays later, they get the game-winning touchdown. Like that was a very Eagles-esque drive,
sure.
And it was as if they like exchange personalities like some Freaky Friday type thing, and where Mike Vrabel and Doug Pederson just switched because it was just a weird because the Titans aren't. The last couple of years, at least, on the previous coaching staff, which was pretty bland offensively, they weren't known for taking risks like that or, making gutty play calls.
Right. And, you talk about, like, the Freaky Friday nature of it. There were so many opportunities here that the Eagles typically take advantage of. The running game was okay. There were some big plays. I thought Wendell Smallwood played well again.
Ajayi, for having a broken back, he ran the ball really tough.
Well, and part of me wonders, did they miss Corey Clement or Darren Sproles here because of how they're able to kind of extend plays for longer yardage? Like there are a lot of catch and run opportunities in this game.
And Wentz didn't really target the running. I mean, there was a play to Ajayi where he got a nice catch,
right?
But they generally weren't targeting the running backs, and that's probably because even though Small looked good catching the ball last week, like Darren Sproles and Corey Clement, that's them.
Yeah, and they didn't take advantage. The thing that they didn't take advantage of was that in the fourth quarter was that 42-yard return by DeAndre Carter.
Great
that
play.
Should have been a game breaker, and they still couldn't get out of their own way.
I didn't even think about that. I mean, it's funny because we didn't know that Corey Clement wasn't going to play today. He was questionable like he was last week with a quad injury. We were confused why the Eagles opted to sign DeAndre Carter onto the active roster from the practice squad as opposed to Trey Sullivan to get a fourth safety in there. We'll touch on that in a little bit. But the fact that they brought Carter in, it became pretty clear that it was probably because of returns. And I think he might have just secured his roster spot the rest of the season because they haven't really been getting anything on punt returns. And he had a game. I mean, he was tackled by the punter. Like, it was the last guy there.
Right. And, again, this team has to take advantage. They're not creating enough. They're not winning the turnover battles. They're either tying or they're losing the turnover battle.
Penalties.
I mean, that Avonte Maddox interception should have led. That's the thing. They had big plays by one or two guys that should have been game breakers. Instead, they settled for field goals. They settled for a field goal after the Carter thing. They
halftime.
They set the halftime. Hey, we're going to run the ball. There's 8 seconds left, and then we're going to take a field goal. Like, to me, that just didn't make a lot of sense. Take 2 shots towards the end zone. Like, you have one of the best red zone quarterbacks in the league, and they basically drained the clock. During the fourth quarter, they, when they probably should have taken some timeouts and given the ball back to themselves, they let the Titans draw down that clock, and it came back to bite them. To me, this game was very weird. It didn't seem like a Philadelphia Eagles offense under Doug Pederson. It didn't feel like Jim Schwartz's defense was making the plays that they typically make. I mean, there were some sacks in this game. There were some, big moments, but you've got Avonte Maddox covering Corey Davis in the end zone in overtime, and that's a huge size mismatch.
Avonte Maddox is 5'9", maybe.
Yeah, I mean, in Corey Davis, I believe is 6'3" or 6'4". You don't want that to be the matchup. I will say this. There were some standouts in this game that really should have made the difference.
We'll get to that.
Yeah, we'll get into that. But, that's what's so weird about this game is there were guys that stepped up and they made big plays.
There are a lot of positives to draw out of this game.
Sure.
And I think a lot of the negatives are things that, as Doug Pederson said, they are fixable. The offensive line's not going to play like they did every week. I mean, they have been struggling a little bit recently, and we'll talk about that in a second.
So it's only really been on the road that they've struggled.
No, you're right. That's a good point. I think they I don't have it in front of me. I think the Titans finished with 9 quarterback hurries and 4 sacks, including the strip sack one. But all right, so now let's use this as jumping off, and we can start with the offensive line since we're talking about them. Let's go break down the offense. Let's start with the offensive line. I mean, Lane Johnson, who doesn't give up sacks, he just doesn't. He doesn't give up pressure. He had that strip sack that he gave up. Carson Wentz was constantly in peril. He was running for his life. Carson Wentz has a tendency when he's being brought down to still try because he's Carson Wentz. He wants to make something happen, and a lot of times that's not the right move. Where maybe you just try and throw it out of bounds, and he was trying to make plays as he's being tackled, and a lot of that is because wasn't good protection. That's just the reality.
He was the offensive line. When I look at the stats right now, 11 quarterback hits. You had 6 tackles for loss, 4 sacks. Like, you can't win games like that, especially close ones. And, Jason Peters had to leave for a couple of plays. Brandon Brooks left for a play. But that was inconsequential. Like, this was the starting lineup that was having a letdown. And
this is supposed to be the best offensive line in the NFL.
Right. And, that moniker is thrown out at random, like every and it seems to only dwell around the NFC East,
because the Cowboys for years,
the Redskins were considered one of the better offense. So, like, to me, this was a letdown for a group that you can typically depend on, and I feel like Carson had to kind of overexert himself at times. He didn't make any bad throws. He made some
questionable maybe
decisions,
but it was never like, even his bad ones weren't like risky, really. Like, there was even, like, towards the end, he, like, threw it up in the end zone. He threw it so nobody could intercept it, but it probably was out of reach of his receiver. Like, those are the kind of bad decisions he was making.
I'd give them the offensive line a C- for this game. Moving on from that, though, wide receiver.
It's a very interesting group to look at today.
Right. So
we can even go progressively, like, from the start. Like, to start the game, I believe Nelson Aguilar had a couple drops early.
Yep.
And then he also had a couple catches. Zach Ertz was catching everything. I think he had 10 catches in the first half.
He went over.
He went over 100 yards before halftime.
Yeah,
maybe right after halftime.
I believe Jeff McClain from Philly.com said that this was the first time that Ertz went over 100 yards in a game since in the last 2 years.
Oh wow, I didn't even realize that. That's wild.
So, but I got to tell you, he's on pace to be
100 catch guy
at least.
But
like, that's, but it was all for naught, kind of.
But yeah. But so then at some point in the first half, Jordan Matthews, of all people, burns, I believe, Malcolm Butler, who the Eagles didn't see in the Super Bowl. Maybe they wish they did. I don't know. But Jordan Matthews had a 65-yard catch. 56, sorry. Reverse the numbers. It was his longest catch since he had a 78-yarder from your boy Sam Bradford a couple years ago.
No,
your favorite
he's not
quarterback.
My boy.
He loves Sam. He loves him. But Jordan Matthews, like, nobody saw that coming. He clearly, like, belongs now, maybe. But
except a certain beat writer. But yeah.
But later he had a really bad drop in the fourth quarter that was like quintessential old school Jordan Matthews.
I mean, that was
it was really bad
drop.
But Nelson Aguilar is the one to talk about here on the negative. On the positive, the one that we can touch on Aguilar more in a second. But Alshon Jeffrey returned, and he looked maybe even better than he did last year.
Yeah,
he had his first 100-yard game since he joined the Eagles.
Yeah, he said after in the locker room that he didn't feel 100%. Well, you know what? His stat sheet looked pretty good. He was targeted 9 times, had 8 receptions for 105 yards and a touchdown.
I mean, think about last year he had 57 catches on 120 targets.
Right.
Today he was 8 for 9. Like, that just crazy.
People, there are a lot of people that question if he's a number one guy. They question his ability to change the offense. But, I mean, the 31-yard catch was a beautiful ball and a great catch. The more impressive one to me is the 16-yard touchdown where he skied for the... Like, you have a shoulder injury.
It was a jump ball.
Yeah, you have a shoulder injury, and you're bringing this down, and he has got such strong hands. I think this offense moved a little bit better than it had in previous
There was
weeks.
more flow, for sure.
There was. The problem is it's inconsistent. And I think Jeffrey can help with that. Obviously, it's his first game back.
But let's talk about Aguilar now. Let's go into that.
Yeah, let's go into Aguilar.
We've been really high on him all season. You've talked about especially about how you think he can be a star. He looked a lot more like the guy that everybody called a bust. He had some. It was focus. It was bad focus. There were bad drops. There was a couple plays where Wentz had him and he just didn't reel it in. Like it
looked like 2015 Aguilar.
It was a rough night for him, honestly. And he's not. There's a lot of stuff that cost them the game, but he was certainly a factor in why they were not able to move the ball when they got into the Titans'
he had
territory.
a couple of third down drops. Yeah. And, here's what my concern is. I thought this was a Nick Foles problem. He is not making plays after the catch at all. At all. He caught 5. He was targeted 12 times today, which is ungodly.
That's a lot.
That speaks to Carson Wentz and his trust in him and his belief.
Kept going to him, yeah.
Right. Caught 5 passes for 22 yards.
Jeez.
Like
his yards per catch is really bad this
yeah,
year.
like he averaged 4.4 yards a catch. His long was 10. So that means that he caught 3 passes for 12 yards.
And he got targeted down the field more than anybody.
You know, and that's the thing. It's like you wonder if people talk about a Super Bowl hangover and everybody kind of like laughs it off that it's an Eagles fan, but like this team at times looks shell-shocked. There are times where this team just doesn't know how to answer its own questions. And I don't know. I don't think it's a confidence thing, like they're too overconfident or they're taking people lightly or anything like that. I just think that I turned to you during the game. I said, this team misses Bo Allen. Like, this team misses...
Like the players in between. Like the guys like on the edges.
I think the Super Bowl hangover
that you don't think about,
is the guy that they lost. This team misses LeGarrette Blount.
Patrick Robinson.
I mean, this is a team that was so stacked, even with injuries last year. They are not as stacked as they were.
Even your boy Brent Selleck, he did the little things blocking the ball. Trey Burton.
Brent Selleck probably would have
helped
over the last 2 weeks.
Yeah. I mean, even Trey Burton, gadget weapon guy that they used quite a bit in the red zone.
This team played like an 8-8 team today. They've played like an 8-8 team.
Like a Jeff Fisher team, if you will.
Yeah. Well, that's a 7-9 team. But yeah.
Touche.
Yeah. Okay, so here, just briefly, because this is about the post game, but in week 1 they played like a 9-7 team. In week 2 they played like a 6-10 team. In week 3 they played like a 9-7 team. In week 4 they played like an 8-8 team. You know, so those aren't playoff teams in the NFC. Those are not playoff teams. But they haven't.
Saying "but" a lot,
right? But this team hasn't put it together because you see it in glimpses, and the second that switch turns on, that's it. Like this team's going to have to make up for it. You're going to look. They went 2-2 in the first quarter of the season. That's not terrible, especially but they should have won this game. They should have won the Buccaneers game on paper. That's a problem. Yeah. Like they probably should. Their losses,
and they could have lost the other two that they won.
Right. They should be 3-1 right now, and the loss that they should have, they actually won against the Falcons because the Falcons are a good team. I don't know where the Titans will be. They're like they're like a unicorn, but like Tampa just lost.
Got destroyed.
Tampa gave up 5 touchdowns in the first half.
To Mitchell,
right.
Sorry.
Now, I like Matt Nagy. Don't get me wrong, and I don't want to go off on a tangent, but like that. But they're very similar offenses.
Yeah.
The Bears have a very similar offense to the Eagles. It's so West Coast based, and they do a lot of the similar things.
Nagy is a Andy Reid disciple, and
right.
Doug Pederson. I think they all work together. Yeah.
Now, you look at this, and not to get too far ahead of us, you play Minnesota, you play the Giants, who are
on
always
a short
tough,
week.
On a short week, and they always play you tough. Then you go to
London.
Then you host Carolina.
Oh yeah, Carolina was a good team.
Carolina's a good team, and I'm telling you, Christian McCaffrey's going to be a freaking problem for this team if they play the way that they did today.
And then you got London,
and then you got London, and Jacksonville's 3-1. They bounced back from looking terrible against the same Titans team.
I mean, and then you have the Saints later in the season, like
but like so.
Yeah, their stretch coming up is tough.
You look at this next quarter of the season, and if you go 2-2 in that one, you're 4-4 heading into the the second half of the season, and it doesn't get much easier.
Yeah. All right, let's go. I think it's the only one we have to hit now. Oh no, we haven't really talked about Wentz.
So we talked about the receivers, the tight ends. Dallas Goedert.
Let's hit running backs.
Okay, let's hit running backs. I thought Jay Ajayi never got the opportunity to really kind of settle in.
Yeah.
The back end, he left for a couple of plays and actually a whole series. I don't know if that was due to injury or just they wanted to give Wendell some reps, but Josh Adams was barely involved. I think he was in on 2 plays.
He didn't get any touches. Yeah.
Smallwood is better than a lot of people think he is.
I mean, shoot, he had 5 carries for 39 yards, 7.8 yards per carry.
But that's the thing, though. That's why I think when I say this team played like a 9-17 or an 8-8 team, you're seeing guys emerge. It's just they're not being used to where they're emerged yet. And so I think you look at a guy like Avonte Maddox, who we'll talk about later, but Smallwood played well today, and I think there's some momentum there.
Yeah, and I mean, Ajayi ran the ball really strongly, and he ran it with power, and he looked pretty good. He had some big runs in overtime. though he did lose yards on that last drive before they settled for a field goal. But, I mean, he looked okay. He'll be better when he has guys like Corey Clement and Darren Sproles to complement him, I think.
I'll say this, I'm concerned. Because I turned to you again during the game, and I said,
turned to me a lot, I noticed.
Yeah, I do. It's because I always like to look left. That's my better side. Jay didn't look healthy in this game. He normally runs upright, and that's his style. He was kind of hovering a little bit. I mean, there were times where he had that great spin move where he got the first down. But outside of that, he just really kind of looked, not lethargic, but like very out of touch, out of place. And I don't know if you address it. The Le'Veon Bell stuff's out there, and we'll talk about that later in the week. But, like, J.H.I. does not look that healthy. And if he's going to be like this all season, they need to add a guy.
Yeah, it's not going to cut it with the guys they have. That's fair. All right, let's talk about the most important one is Carson Wentz. We talked a lot of the reason why maybe he wouldn't get an A+ has less to do with him than the guys that made mistakes around him. Like you said, he was running for his life all day, but he finished 33 of 50, the most pass attempts he's had since his rookie year. When
66% too.
Yeah, 66%. When he had, I think, 60 attempts against the Bengals, 348 yards, 2 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. I think he looked pretty good. I mean, some of those throws, there wasn't like any. He didn't have any like amazing throws where you're like Carson Wentz is the best quarterback in the NFL, maybe, but he was really good today, I thought.
For 3 quarters.
For 3 quarters, yeah.
His first, they had opportunities.
Yeah, he had a lot of incompletions in that fourth quarter.
He was bad, I think, the first quarter. I ended up giving him a B for the overall game. I didn't think he was that great in the red zone. He did have the one throw to Jeffrey. In the open field, though, there were some throws he made to Zack Ertz and to Alshon Jeffrey that were, I mean, vintage Carson Wentz. I don't know if he's old enough for you to call him anything vintage, but Carson's a really good quarterback, and he shook off the rust, and I'm hoping that means that against the Vikings, he's a guy, too, that I think sometimes plays up to his competition, if that makes sense. But, look, I think he's going to be up for this Vikings game. He's going to be ready to go.
He didn't get to play them the last time.
Right. And, the thing is, too, is he's going to be judged by how he plays following that Super Bowl. Well, he is unquestionably a better quarterback than Nick Foles. Nick Foles did tear the Vikings apart in the NFC title game.
It seems like they're still feeling the after effects because they haven't. Their defense has been a mess.
Yeah, well,
which is crazy to think.
And you have the opportunity to essentially knock them out of the playoffs.
Yeah, really, they're 1-2-1, I believe, right now. Yeah. They lost on Thursday to the Rams. They gave up like 1 billion yards.
Yeah, I'm isolating. I'm trying to get Nelson Aguilar against Anthony Barr as much as possible, and forcing those mismatches. But anyway, all right, let's flip over to the defense.
Let's start with the defensive line. Early, they were looking really good early.
Mm-hmm. I think Elodie Nada had the best game of his.
He had a sack late in the game that didn't wind up doing anything in reality, but it was key, especially because you don't really expect Nada to make those plays at this stage of his career. But early in the game, Michael Bennett, I think, had 3 pressures in 4 plays, and one of them was a sack.
Yeah. So,
and Fletcher Cox was just destroying dudes, as he always does, in the middle. I think as the game wore on, they clearly were getting fatigued, which is kind of a concern because last year their whole thing was they were constantly shuffling those guys,
right.
So that never happened. Like, they never had that problem. So now you're kind of starting to see that they're playing more right now, especially Fletcher Cox, as you wrote about this week. I don't know if he specifically was wearing down by the end, but the defensive line, they just weren't getting pressure. They were clearly lagging along by the end of that game.
So again, I talk about 8-8, playing like an 8-8 team, playing like a 9-7 team, and guys emerging. As my rubber phone scrapes against this surface. Sorry about that, guys. Michael Bennett played so well in that first half. He was a menace. Those weren't just normal pressures. He was beating guys. In one series, you brought up the 2 pressures and then the sack, because that's how it'll go down in the whatever.
Yeah.
He beat his assignment clean 3 times in 5 plays. He was that drive. He got them off the field. And I think he's starting to get a little bit more comfortable in that wide 9 and moving around. Derek Barnett is really good.
Yeah, he looked really good too.
I think we need to start acknowledging that Derek Barnett is
he's becoming what we talked about even back when Elliott was still here. We talked about how important this season was for him because they kind of need him to become the face of that defensive line. Defensive ends, I should say, because Fletcher Cox is the face. Because Brandon Graham's going to be a free agent this offseason, and I'm not sure they're going to bring him back.
Well, and Chris Long
could retire. Michael Bennett could retire or be released.
Nada could retire.
So Derek Barnett, they have a lot riding on him.
He's a foundational piece, in my opinion. He is winning not just because of talent. He's winning from a technique standpoint, which is really good because that's sustainable. I'd like to see Josh Sweat out there a little bit more because I think that guy has incredible upside.
If they feel like he's not ready to go out there, though, they're not going to put him out there, yeah.
But I think the defensive line played relatively well. It's just they did, like you said, look gassed. I mean, that long drive.
The overtime, you could, especially Brandon Graham in particular. He, to be fair, for his credit, he did start way later than everybody else. Mm-hmm. He didn't play his preseason game, and he didn't even practice until late in the preseason. So I
thought he actually had a relatively good.
He did, but he was one in particular I noticed was kind of lagging at the end there, and I think that's probably why they haven't been giving him as many snaps these last couple weeks. I think as the season goes along, he'll be okay. But yeah,
from a linebacker perspective, excuse me. I thought Bradham had some good moments. I thought he had some bad moments. I thought Hicks did really well as a blitzer. But overall, I mean,
not much to talk about.
There's not much to talk about.
I feel like that's kind of been with the linebackers. They haven't done anything really bad, but they've been solid.
Exactly. They've been solid, and I think Jordan Hicks is really important to this defense. When I haven't always necessarily been his biggest advocate. At corner...
This is a discussion we need to have right now.
And this is a longer discussion because Schwartz has always taught since he was even in Tennessee, he wants his corners to play off because he doesn't want to give away the big play. You're playing the wide nine, which opens you up for certain things, and you need to have the run support. I don't know if he's going to have to change that because he does not have corners with catch-up speed. Jalen Mills is getting beat. And he's 10 yards off. I think Darby had an okay game. I mean, he wasn't terrible, but
he's not a very good tackler, I would say.
No, he is not.
Sidney Jones is pretty good again, though he did get beat on
a touchdown.
But I mean, he's kind of a rookie, so
he is
everything's gravy with him right now. I think, but yeah,
I jinxed half these guys. I wrote about him.
Yeah, right. You got to stop writing about dudes, right? But Jalen Mills in particular, he's obviously been a lightning rod for criticism amongst his fan base. I think last week the criticism was a little unfounded. He had some bad one bad pass interference. The other one was maybe questionable.
Right. Yeah.
Today he was just getting beat. He just didn't have a good game.
Yeah, he
had another penalty too. Though that one was a little questionable again.
He got beat for 28 yards, and then he got beat for 51 yards.
Corey Davis was just beating him. And I don't think Corey Davis is necessarily a fast guy either.
No, but he's kind of got a TO. I was talking to John Davenport about it. He's got a TO factor to him. He's got good size. He uses it well. He's able to run. This
might have been the best game of his career so far.
Yeah, I mean the game-winning touchdown too. The pass interference calls come with the aggressive play that Schwartz preaches, but he's been flagged 3 times for 71 yards in the last 2 games. That's a lot of yardage. That's a good stat line for a wide receiver.
Yeah.
So look, I'm not going to advocate for Rasul Douglas at this point, but at some point,
give the guy some snaps.
At some point, you need to create a rotation or something because Darby will give up his occasional play. When Mills loses in coverage, he loses badly. When he wins, which happens pretty often, but this is a macro position. If you lose, if you mess up one play, that could be a bad game for you. That's how people view it. Avonte Maddox, I thought played really, really well. He gave up the game-winning touchdown. We'll talk about him with the safeties. I don't know what you do at corner. I don't know because, the group that I'm most concerned about is running back right now that Jeffrey's back. And Howie's a magician, but how many trades can this guy make? And there's not a lot out there at the cornerback position. So are you going to take your lumps? I know Schwartz loves Mills, but at what point do you say, hey, we need to create a rotation? Because I don't think you bench him. I think he's too good of a tackler, and I think his run support is very much needed. But Rasul Douglas, every time that guy's on the field, he makes a play. And you're going to eventually hear, we want Douglas or we want Rasul. It's going to be like
it might already be there, to be honest.
Shout out to my brother-in-law's brother, Paul, who texted me.
Brother-in-law's brother.
Yes,
got it.
Because I don't think he's technically my brother-in-law. Paul, if you're listening to this, I got your text messages about Jalen Mills not being good.
Oh, I get those too.
I get that every game. Every game.
Even my dad, who doesn't even text me much during the game, would be like, Jalen Mills needs to go.
Paul only texts me to tell me that Jalen Mills is bad. But look, this Vikings game to me is a big one for him because he's going to go up against
Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs.
Yeah, and if he's on Stephon Diggs, this is going to be a problem. I mean, Thielen's great too. It's a pick your poison. You might want to move Sidney Jones outside. I wasn't for that before this week.
Or have him follow one of those guys or something.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to have to move things around. They play sides in the Eagles' defense, and I think that's going to be a really big problem for them.
Yeah. Let's move over to safety. Of course, Rodney McLeod out for the season. Mm-hmm. They didn't sign anybody. Corey Graham started for him. I think they pretty clearly missed Rodney McLeod because he kind of was the guy that he was at the back of the secondary, kind of cleaning up mistakes that guys would make. Oh wow, Earl Thomas is out he has a leg fracture. He's probably out for the season.
Yeah.
So the Eagles aren't trading for Earl Thomas. So if you thought I was about to start talking about how they should trade for Earl Thomas,
it's great that this happened while we were talking about safety, so we didn't have to completely
But focus on the game for a second. I think they pretty clearly missed McLeod. I don't think Corey Graham is as good at the things that Rodney McLeod is good at, and I think pretty clearly moving. I mean, Avonte Maddox was impressive, and it was kind of surprising that he was the guy they went with as the Corey Graham replacement. Mm-hmm. He did pretty good, but I don't know. You can if you have a guy in the back you believe and trust in, like a Rodney McLeod, I think you can handle those mistakes that Mills makes a little bit better.
Well, I think McLeod, the way Malcolm Jenkins kind of describe the way they game plan differently for every single team. And it's pretty apparent, too, in those first three games. The problem is you've got an ace in the hole with McLeod because he was playing so well at free safety, but he also allows you to move Graham around. He allows you to move Jenkins around. You can't move guys around anymore. You can't. So
and those guys are at their best when they're being moved around.
Right. So Graham's put in a position where at 33 years old, he's going to be lined up against a slot receiver, or he's going to be lined up against a big tight end. That's not always beneficial for this defense. Avonte Maddox, I thought, played really well up until the overtime, but, how much can you realistically expect of him? This is the first game he's ever gotten with actual defensive snaps. I wasn't surprised that he was the fix because a lot of people subliminally kind of mentioned him. Oh, I think Avonte could step up. They never really were conclusive about it, but they kind of tipped their hand. I think. Look, Rasul Douglas isn't moving to safety. It's become pretty clear.
I mean, they were pretty adamant about that before the season. Right. I think every time this crops up, people are like, oh, maybe they'll do it now. But I think they're pretty committed to developing him as an outside corner.
But that's what's so frustrating, right? Is that Rasul Douglas is probably.
But they're not playing him as an outside corner.
They're not playing him at all.
Yeah.
It's that's the issue.
Yeah, did he play tonight? Maybe special teams, but.
Yeah, he played on special teams,
but not on defense, though, right?
I didn't see him.
I guess we'll find out when we see the snap counts later.
Yeah, but you've got to put good young players on. He's not benefiting from just playing special teams. This is a kid with actual talent. It's not like he's just a guy that could be a career special teams player. This kid's Douglas can play, and he's shown it. Last year, yeah, there were hiccups, but he played pretty well. He had a start in place of Rasul Douglas. So you go from playing, these guys, and then you've got Sidney Jones coming back, and Rasul gets passed over consistently. You've got to create a way to get that guy on the field because the turnovers aren't coming like they used to last year. They're just not. And part of that is you don't have guys that are like ball hawks. Ronald Darby had a career high last year in interceptions, and he had an interception in week 1, but cool. Like he's not a guy that's going to get him in droves. Avonte
Samuel?
Yeah. Although he kind of reminded me with the way he was juking guys after the interception.
Yeah.
Avonte Maddox, that was kind of like not a fluke interception, but it was a really bad overthrow. You know, it wasn't like he like made the play on the ball. You know what I mean? And then, you know, you've got who else? What's their third interception that they have on the season?
Can't remember.
Yeah, I don't remember either. Anyway, the point is they don't have guys that consistently make plays on the ball, and that's going to bite them. Like, them losing possession on their own 40, yeah, they only held them to a field. Yeah, they still held them to a field goal. But man, like, this defense is not getting the ball back to the offense. It's just not happening, and that happened so often last year. And you began to see it, like the lack of turnover ability in the Super Bowl. They went forever without a turnover. Yeah, I know it's Tom Brady, but then finally Brandon Graham got the sack fumble picked up by Derek Barnett, and then you know what happened. They raised a banner.
Oh,
but,
interesting.
Like, that's what's so frustrating to me, and that's kind of why I think a lot of these games have been really lukewarm, probably from a fan perspective and probably from our perspective, is guys are not creating turnovers. This defense should be creating turnovers with the pass rushers they have and the DBs and linebackers that they have. It just, to me, this is really one of the reasons why they're struggling so much.
Yes. All right. We got to get going, but before we do, let's just touch on the special teams real briefly.
Oh, yeah, Jake Elliott.
Jake Elliott made all 3 of his field goals. He seems to have fixed his bug of missing short-range field goals, but he hasn't made any long-range ones. But he made one at the end of regulation. He made one in overtime, and he made one before halftime.
Cameron Johnston had a duck of a punt earlier.
He didn't have his best game.
Yeah, that was.
And then return-wise, as we mentioned earlier, DeAndre Carter pretty clearly is their best punt returner. Special teams was solid. I mean,
yeah, they were. I mean, they made plays. From here though,
once Sproles comes back, it'll look even better.
Right, and I think this was a game that they missed Sproles for sure. I don't know if he makes a huge difference in that Bucs game, but this game they missed Sproles, and there's so many guys that are not on this team anymore that were so influential in that Super Bowl run. And it's like, you don't have that here. There isn't the same feeling, I would assume, too. I mean, obviously, you and I didn't cover them last year, but it's just watching them. And I watched them from afar, believe me, the last 2 years. It's just, I don't know. I'm kind of puzzled, if that makes sense. Because I don't know I can't put my finger on it. It's the lack of the turnovers. It's the making stupid mistakes. They have been penalized a ton. And I don't know if it's a discipline thing. I just think they're playing careless football at times, or they're gassed, or they don't. I mean, remember you and I talk about this all the time. They didn't really have a full off season.
Yeah,
it's like when you talk about like rookies who immediately are thrust in. They got the combine experience, they have all that stuff, and they don't experience their first off season until the next season, and then that's partially why they play so well. I'm wondering if it's just, even the Patriots, I mean, they won big today against the Dolphins, but they started off sluggish. So maybe that's part of it. Maybe this next quarter of the season, they play up to their competition. They're playing a bunch of playoff contenders in Minnesota and Carolina and Jacksonville, and their one kind of down opponent is a team that plays them extremely well.
Yep. So yeah, we'll end on that note. Tough loss, but we have a tough stretch ahead, as we mentioned, and we'll end on that note. So remember, you got to subscribe to our podcast. We're on all the apps: iHeartRadio, YouTube, Spreaker, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, SoundCloud. Read all of our stories on NJ.com/Eagles. We have a lot of good stuff on there for you, and a lot coming this week. Follow us on Twitter, ask us questions, and thanks for listening, guys.